It's pretty good. Welcome back to the channel, lads and ladies, and welcome to the T14. I noticed that the XA38 and most of the B25s, or some of the B25s, now sit at the same 4-3 battle rating, so I wondered, how do they stack up? And I have a lot of experience with both of them, and this video is not about them, but I had a great time because I also remembered that the T14 sits at rank 3 now that it has a 4-7 battle rating, and that's pretty good. I was sad to lose my boy M24 Chaffee for the event grinds, but Chaffee-san still sits at rank 3 because Japan needs every piece of hardware it can get, historical accuracy for the win, and in the game of War Thunder, there is a place for that. I'm really excited about update Red Sky coming. It looks real good, unlike the chat, and let's just start talking about the T14 again. This tank is delightful, and it pretty much always has been. The only thing that held this tank back, in my estimation, was its rank of 2, which coming to the game at a 4-0 or 4-3 battle rating seemed a little bit extreme. It might have been 3-7 for a while, but it quickly rose up in battle rating, and it has risen all the way to 4-7, which is definitely justified for this vehicle. The rank 2, probably not so much. And the price also for this premium felt like a rank 3. I don't know whose decision it was to make this rank 2 in the first place, but I don't appreciate it all that much, along with whoever just managed to punch around through. Well, I'm not even sure. Taking out my driver on the left side of the tank, that's not even where the whole weak spot is, so maybe he just got a good angle on his round. I'm not quite sure. I'm not intimately familiar with the armor on this tank like I am with the KVs and T34s that I'm facing, because you really have to know where their weak spots are in order to defeat them. And the same could be said for the T14. This was spammed out for quite a while when it was sitting at a 4-3 battle rating, but when its BR went up to 4-7, it became much less popular, although it's still one of the best sub 5.0 heavy tanks in the game in terms of armor and firepower, and it stacks up nicely compared to the competition. What you really get with this is basically a assault tank version or a heavy tank version of a Sherman, and that's not a bad thing. Of course, there is the Sherman Jumbo, but it suffers from its own issues and fails to realize the potential that this tank has with its ability to angle the hull, which is definitely appreciated. If only you had a little bit more turret armor, things would be just peachy, but there is quite a bit of curvature and overlapping on the active parts of the turret around the gun, where everybody tends to aim. So you have a sort of a Sherman situation going on there. You do have the same weak spot in the mantlet as the Sherman, but that's less of a hazard to your crew and more of a liability in terms of your gun breach, which tends to absorb everything these days once again. But you also have the advantages of the Sherman, the fantastic 75mm round that everyone that has ground through this rank of USA should be intimately familiar with by now. Of course, if you're buying a premium, so you don't have to grind for this, but trust me, you're going to be seeing a lot of this gun. And the low-speed stabilizer, the good turret traverse, overall great gun handling, the 50 cal mounted on the roof that is never unwelcome, and some actual armor along with it, the ability to angle the hull, really make this tank just a great addition to your ensemble in the American line, and you are starting to get into a battle rating range where heavy tanks are becoming obsolete unless it's a KV, because KV things. But your good gun and your good gun handling definitely, okay, that guy despawned, definitely come through for you where the armor starts to lack in the 5+ BR range. But it looks like we're top tier here, and that definitely goes a long way. You can see there's a lot of T34 spam, and there's also some KVs coming into play, and this tank, like everything armed with the American 75, is very capable of dealing with them in terms of firepower. And of course, it just keeps coming back to the armor. American armor tends to be mediocre at best. They don't really have heavy tanks at this tier other than the T14, and the T6 is definitely a thing, but it's heavy. I wouldn't call it heavily armored though. It's a very, very strange balance of design features that probably made a lot more sense before larger cannons were entering the battlefield. And the T14 definitely feels more comfortable as a frontline heavy tank, which, you know, it's kind of unfortunate that it's a premium that joins the club of the Excelsior, which is a similar deal. Britain not having really reliable heavy armor. They do have some heavy armor available, but with some somewhat less glaring weak spots in terms of the Churchill's turret ring than what they used to have. But the flat faces of the Churchill Mark I and Mark III just are not gonna cut it when it comes to armor protection against the kinds of guns that they'll face. So you have to do creative things, and they get by, but again, not reliable the way that the KVs are, which are really the gold standard for the game, which is pretty obvious. Look at how many versions of the early KVs we have in the game. It's because they're very good tanks, they're very popular with players, great opportunity for cross-tree premiums and all that jazz that fills the delightful slushy pockets of the Snail Overlord. And yet there's also the Excelsior, which is unfortunately a rare event premium that I happen to fortunately have in my possession, and it offers a great balance between mobility, overall protection, and firepower, something that the Brits, well, sort of lack. I say firepower, but it's not the best. You understand the British AP suffering. Sometimes it's godlike, and sometimes it's fart-like, so you just kind of take what you can get and adapt your strategy accordingly. And of course, with Soviet armor being so strong at this tier in terms of protection, just because of the way things are calculated in the game right now, it's nice to have something to counter that, and generally the counter has been German guns, and whoever's on the German team then tries to support the Panzers, but then they tend to get knocked out on account of, well, the fact that they don't have homegrown heavy tanks at this tier either. But again, the T14, it's such a fantastic tank. It's one of the most recommended tanks in the American premium line for a beginner. Now, because it's rank 3, it'll help you grind all the way through rank 4 with double progress, and it's such a fun tank to play that you might not even mind getting half RP from it. I think you might end up seeing the results for this match, and maybe you'll agree that, you know, half of 14,000 is still pretty good. So I did want to check out the B-25, and this is one of the bomber variants available in the game. The nice thing about having the bomber cockpit for the B-25, because you also have the PBJs, which are really just a B-25 with a different, well, they're essentially a B-25 with a different cockpit configuration. There's a nose that you can replace with machine guns, and I know, how exciting. That sounds like a pretty exciting experience. But this B-25 I've loaded out with 250-pound bombs because once you get this set up properly, and you do have to set up your controls to not fly the aircraft in autopilot when you're in the bomber's sight, then you can manually fly and do little shenanigans like this. We dropped a few bombs, and we dropped a few more, and they are laser accurate. They are as accurate as they can possibly be in the game of War Thunder. It's even better than the CCIP that the Phantoms have access to. If you learn to use that bombing sight. So having the bombing sight is a good thing, is basically what I meant to say. Head-oning an IL-2 is generally not so productive, but again, this is a B-25. We've got a lot of forward-facing firepower, even with the bomber configuration, and unfortunately, that Italian Postboy anti-air managed to set a fatal fire in our engine. We could have tried to throttle down and shut off the engine, and that does sometimes work for an engine fire. Generally, a fuel fire is a death certificate in a B-25, but you do have a little bit more survivability in the B-25s, which is one of the great things about them. And of course, I'm lumping the PBJs in along with them. When I say B-25, I'm really talking about the PBJ-1H. That is my favorite of all of the aircraft, and even though you don't get the cheap sight for the bomber, you get a 75mm tank cannon, so there's that. And that's kind of awesome. Going into premium mode, this is the XA-38 Experimental Attacker. It's sort of an anti-submarine configuration, if I recall. And we're actually going to be dogfighting an Italian fighter here for a little while. Well, not dogfighting, actually. We're going to be flying like a real American, which is to fly away and let the enemy slowly die behind us. At least, that's the plan. The defensive guns and protective armor on this aircraft are definitely less effective than the B-25s, but almost everything in the game is. The B-25 has one of the best defensive suites, definitely at this tier, and possibly pound for pound the best defensive setup in the game between its survivability, the armor for the defensive gunners, which is very important. I'm looking at you, XA-38, and just a number of rear-facing 50 cals makes a huge difference. But something can also be said for engine size, and that is something the XA-38 definitely brings to the table. With, if I recall correctly, are those two B-17 engines? I can't quite remember, but they're big, chunky boys, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And here we go, rolling underneath whatever whatever that is. Reggiani Pasta Alfresco, if I recall correctly. Anyway, we get a bomb kill, and right after that we try causing a little more damage to the Italian guy, but I mean, the tickets are bleeding down. He's not pursuing us the way he used to in the past, and he is flying a little bit defensively. He felt the sting of the Monarch there, and he is not about to just ride our tail, although he hasn't given up on pursuit either. I could have played a little bit more aggressively here, but I mean, it just feels a little bit too much like throwing my life away. And again, the survivability of the XA-38 is not great. It's forward-facing 50 cals, only number 2, which is a sad experience compared to the B-25s. And yet, the 75mm cannon mounted directly where your targeting reticle is pointing is much easier to aim than the PBJ's cannon, deals about the same amount of damage, if not more, and fires a little bit faster, which is pretty damn fast for a 75. So all in all, if you're considering picking up the XA38 as an attacker, it's basically the same thing as a B25 along with the 4.3 battle rating, except that it is significantly faster in most altitudes. It has beefier engines, it can handle much higher speeds before the wings rip, and it has lower survivability. So a fair trade-off. It makes sense why this aircraft wound up at 4.3, but I'm definitely appreciative of that fact. And with, what is that, just a dozen kills? Yeah, pretty cool lineup. So just a lot of fun stuff, and I'm still enjoying things in the Game of War Thunder. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.